So we have the basic principle, and then by adding a secondary element, like a rag, we can actually show how one element affects another. So here I'm going to actually just basically animate a shape. If we think about the rag as a triangle, we're demonstrating a couple different things. The primary action, number one, is going to be the ball itself. The rag is going to be a secondary action. So how this is practical and how we apply it to everyday animation or scenes that we might animate is thinking about what leads the action and what follows that action. When we talk and move around, we're led by a primary action. In certain cases, it could be your chest area if you're moving around. If you're into sports and you want to know where, say, the football player is going to go left or right, a lot of times you'll watch his hips to see where he's going to go, because he's going to lean in that direction. So that would become the primary action. If I want to look at an arm action, a lot of times you can sit there and say, okay, well, the arm from the shoulder to the elbow is going to be my primary action. From my elbow to my wrist is going to be a secondary action, and then my hand is going to follow through, and that's going to be a tertiary action. So this is the basics of this principle. So you're going to see basically an action with the bouncing ball, and then the rag is in essence going to drag. So here we have the ball coming down, and as we squash on the ground, the rag is actually still trailing. So it's still on its way down as the ball makes contact. Then as the ball goes up, the rag is following through that action. So it's at that point when the rag actually hits the ground and does its squash. So it's always 2 frames behind the primary action. So here we're going to do a stretch with that rag trailing. As we start to follow through and get into that suspension of disbelief or that hang time, now we're giving the rag that's trailing time to catch up. And it's never going to pass the action of the ball, but it's actually going to catch up. So here we even have things like contraction and expansion with the actual rag. As you're the faster the action is, you're going to have a drag. It's going to be a long, thin action or design. It's going to start to billow out of that and then puff up when we have zero gravity. At its hang time, here it's maximum. The ball is at its top of its peak. The rag is actually weightless, and as the ball starts to change direction, the rag is still going up as the ball is coming down. Then gravity starts to kick in, and in this case we're going to start to see a little bit more of a drag or squash or stretch on the rag, more than you would with the ball. And then we go in the exact same pattern that we just had or demonstrated earlier. When the ball first hit the ground over here, we're actually going to do the same sort of design. Now, the beauty of doing something as basic as this is you're going to notice I'm not getting caught up in the wrinkles and minutia of the drawing. I'm trying to find the shape and just and breaking it down to a very basic design. So a triangle, when you look at this action, is going to give you the impression that it's a rag. Then when we go to the tie down process, we can actually put wrinkles in and try to keep that consistent. So right now we're just trying to find the action. When doing rough animation, that's all you should be thinking about is action. And that's why we do construction and animate bouncing balls and things like that, is because you just want to get the basics of the movement rather than getting caught up in all the minutia and pencil mileage. So here we can see the ball coming in and having an overlapping action or secondary action with that rag. Thank you very much. Now we're going to draw Luther and Belfry, showing the basics, how we construct the characters, going to some detail, and then I'm going to explore posing with the characters. When drawing these characters, it's really important to think about when animating a very basic level of detail, and really concentrate on movement and animation rather than details. It's really easy to get caught up in the line work and the whiskers and the pupils and things. Normally when I animate, I try to leave all that stuff off and just think of the sheer movement and posing rather than all that detail. The drawing in is the fun part. That's done afterwards. So here I'm gonna illustrate a couple drawings here of the two characters, just thinking of basic construction. When drawing Luther, I find the cranium, I do a straight off of that cranium, I'll find the center line, I'll do a straight and a curve to represent his head and snout. His body, if I want to think about it as a very basic shape, is a triangle. Now, mice have a certain design when it comes to their legs, and it's comparable to human anatomy. But what I do is I try to feed off the triangular design of Luther's body. And this gives the bottom portion of his body a bit of an anchor. It gives him weight. He does have a little crotch here. However, when thinking about the armature or what's underneath, or his skeletal structure, you also have to think about where his hips are going to be. So even though he has a very low crotch here, his hips are still high up in his body. This would be roughly where his rib cage would be. And then from here, I think of a very simple design. So if I'm finding where his hands and arms are going to be, I'll find placement, and then I'll add the design for my drapery. So if you notice, I actually have his arms, the upper arms, going to the elbow as a wider dimension here, and then I taper it to the wrist, going very thin in my construction. Then I add the billow of his sleeve, and then I use that as my basic design. So it actually goes from one design to an opposite design. So we start off with thick over here, thin over here, but when you add the sleeve, you're thick over here, and we taper a little bit going to the armpit. It's a design preference, but what it does is it gives weight, and you have an anchor underneath the drapery, and then you're giving room for the sleeve area to move around. So if he does a fast action, we have room for drag and squash and stretch with the drapery. From here, I'll find a cheek area and then find his neck. And then I'll just add little bits of details like his shoulders, and this is where I'll hang the drapery. His ears will go on from here. I'll carve into the circle or the cranium. I'll find placement of the hat. Now, this is one of those old-fashioned hats where the newspaper boys from the 20s and 30s would be wearing. The thing to think about when drawing or constructing his hat is the back of the hat's going to sit roughly on his head, or contour his head, or at least where his hair would be. And that gives you the anchor of the back of the head. The front overlaps his forehead. And this gives me a negative space here where I can actually add his hair. I'm giving myself enough room to have an appealing design for his eyes. I'll find the bridge of the nose or the center line, and I'll do a concave design which leads to the bridge of the nose, and this is where I'll anchor that center point. And then from here I could find where his smile is going to be and where the placement of his eyes are going to be. But as a basic design, I'm looking for things like straights and curves. Like this is on a more subtle level, straight at the top and curve on the bottom for his ear. I'll look for a line of action and follow through with his tail. From here I'll also follow that line of action to follow the placement of his clothes. Find the wrinkles, the overlap of where his sleeves are going to be as these little cuffs. But in general, I'm just looking for this basic shape to build my character. So that's a basic construction for Luther. Now, after you put all the details down, you can actually tweak it and hone in. Like here I might trim part of the silhouette to make this read a little bit better, make sure I got enough room for the eyes and pupils. But here you can fine-tune to get your design to work. But as a basic construction, before putting all the eyes and pupils and eyebrows and hair in, you can actually just animate that triangular shape and get that construction to work. So, thank you. All right, when thinking about Luther's construction or someone in with this type of construction where you have the low crotch, one of the common mistakes that are made but 50% of the time is when you're thinking about the skeleton underneath your construction. A lot of times if we look at a low crotch, if you put the hips here on the bottom and you raise up your leg, we get this kind of design. But when you put the whole body together, it just looks like they have really small, silly legs on this character. So in saying that, this is one of the reasons why when constructing Luther, you might have a low crotch or small legs, or what gives the appearance of small legs, but having the hip bones or hip joints a little bit higher enables you to get a little bit more dimension when it comes to manipulating that character. So if he were to raise up his leg, and say a walk, I'm thinking of his hip joints being very high here, so we're actually going to come high with that hip. And what you end up with is something or design that's a little bit more proportionate. And I'm squashing that volume into the thigh, which gives it more of an animal or animal-like feeling rather than a human leg that would just bend in on itself. This ends up getting flat and stagnant when you have motion. This, you're feeling the character squash and stretch. You're feeling that volume, and you have something that's a lot more believable, even in a basic construction. So the fun thing about Luther is, with his body design, using this basic construction, you can actually get him into all sorts of poses. And the main thing you got to think about is fun. When I'm posing out a character, like Luther, I try to simplify the gesture. One of the things that I think about is the silhouette and having clarity. It doesn't mean that everything always has to be out in the open, but if I were to take this character, color him in, is that design or that pose going to be readable? So I want to make sure that my silhouette is very simple, to the point, and very clear. The clearer my design is, the clearer my animation is going to be. And then we could think about other things like twinning and making sure we have an appealing design, and we don't have both arms the same position, or have tubing going on where the arm or leg are constructed with parallel lines. We can actually feel out the gesture and then make sure, do adjustments, making sure that the placement of the arms aren't paralleling, or in a case like this, I have one arm coming 3/4 of the camera, but I might look at this and say, you know what, the shape, if I were to mirror this, it's almost the exact same placement. I have this almost the exact same height, so I might take this arm pulled up a little bit higher, and now I have a nicer line of action, and the action is a little bit more readable. I think about things like contraction, expansion. Like if I have the character and he's going to anticipate jumping up in the air, I might have him all squashed up and everything balled up into this big contraction. I'm pulling my head down in my silhouette, but I'm also trying to show a very clean arc. And then if I were to spring out of this, I'll do the opposite. I'm going to have the character leaping up, and then all of his arms and legs are now out in the open. So I have an equal and opposite design. So I go from the contraction with the arc going this way, or line of action going that way, and then I do the opposite when he springs out of that action. When you do things like that and you pop the character into an opposing action, going from contraction to expansion, you're giving texture to your animation. And notice how when I'm drawing the character now, and I could throw some really quick gestures just using this basic formula of drawing. I'm not getting caught up in a lot of details. I'm doing something that's very gestural, and I'm thinking about motion, or I'm able to concentrate more on motion and the movement of the animation rather than the minutia of the drawing and the pencil mileage. And the idea is, once you get a character, find that basic construction and how to draw the character in a basic level, and then just practice drawing him in different poses and keeping that loose feeling to that drawing. The looser you can be or feel with that construction, the more potential you're going to have a believable, fun character or animation or movement, and bring that character to life in a believable way. Okay, so drawing Belfry, again, I'll find the cranium, his cheek area. Belfry is roughly 2.5 heads tall, so his feet are going to be roughly around here. And Belfry is a series of very simplistic shapes. When designing a character or constructing a character, I like to look at partially the design sense of that character. So in here, I'm looking for a curve on the front of his body, straight for his back, curve for his bum, in essence, a straight for the bottom of his pants, curve for his jawline, construction line here, straight, curve, and then we can round it off afterwards. The glasses, which sit on the eye line, his nose, mouth, which contours or sits on this plane. Again, thinking about the cheek area as a three-dimensional plane. Center line. Belfry sort of wears a cross between pants and shorts. And then from here, you have the collar, the bow tie. Now, what I do for his arms is I try to keep his arms sort of pudgy. The other thing I try to avoid is a thin wrist with a hand. I try to pudge up everything. So instead of showing a wrist, I actually just have the hands coming out of those sleeves, so we get this feeling like these short stubby arms, and his hands are halfway in those sleeves. It makes him a little bit more pudgy and cute, I think, and more childlike. Like his clothes are almost too big for him, or he has a hard time finding clothes that actually fit his body shape. And he's a mouse, so I guess it'd be hard to find clothes that fit your body shape anyway. So here I'm thinking about the contour of his body. So his pants are pulled up really high, but instead of just doing a line straight across, I'm actually looking for this figure 8 going through his body. So if I were to draw a line through the body, this is the line that's facing us, and then drawing through, you're going to have this potato chip shape or a figure 8, which is giving you the contour of his waist. And he's sort of like the Seven Dwarfs, where they have their pants pulled up really high. And then his feet, to match his pudgy body, I guess I have these big feet tapering at the ankles. Now, the fun thing about this construction is when he actually raises his foot, you could do some fun things with the squash and stretch. So you can actually take those pant legs and gather them up. We can get some wrinkles up here and actually show more of his ankle. So you're getting gathers and things, and trying to look for the fun and appeal in that design. So jolly characters like this, or I consider them jolly because they're pudgy, and you have a little bit more to play with when you're animating and constructing the characters. So it's always looking for that fun. Like when he raises his arms, the jacket's going to ride up. Little things like that gives you little bits of entertainment when designing your character. And obviously the construction of your head, you can actually get some fun stuff and fun folds and overlapping design with that meat of his face. When you raise your shoulders up, that's going to impact the, I guess for lack of a better term, the fat of his cheeks. And you're seeing elements ball up and gather, and drapery pulling out, and seeing how the necktie is going to overlap his chin, how the collar gets sucked into that area there. And you can actually get some really nice designs. So in posing out your characters, you can actually get into some fun elements, like find the design, find the fun in that drawing, find the entertainment in the drawing. Don't get caught up in the minutia. So here I'm actually putting a little bit of detail, but I'm going to now explore going into the character in his basic construction, and what I normally, or how I normally apply the construction to the animation or the beginning of the animation. So now Belfry, again, we're going to follow the drawings that we're doing, the gestural drawings that we're doing with Luther. Fun character to draw. Again, thinking about his silhouette. He's roughly 2.5 heads tall. The fun thing with him is he has these little legs and arms. So a lot of times I'm not really getting into big bends in the legs or thinking about that. A lot of times I'm doing almost like I guess a tin soldier type stance when he's walking around. It keeps him young feeling. It makes the character a little bit more fun to draw, and you get into some neat problem solving issues when it comes to animating them. But in general, look for that gesture. Look for that line of action. I try not to get caught up too much in the details when drawing him. I try to find that cranium. I try to find that jaw area, the bulk of his body, that line of action, keeping it very, very simple. And the less I draw, the more I could put into things like the weight and how these cheek areas interact with the shoulders, or how they react to the shoulders and things. If he's looking at something on the ground, thinking about where his belly, his back is going to be, the squash of his knees, getting some weight so his head is over top of his body here, pulling the arms back, hands on his knees here, thinking about the construction and the angles here. So if he's looking at like a ladybug on the ground here or something, you get a fun little construction that's believable. You can feel the pudginess of the character. I'm keeping a really simple design, or I'm contracting everything. Then if he were to get surprised if something happened, then I can do the opposite, where I can actually take that character and expand him. Now he's 2.5 heads tall, but in something like this, I can actually stretch him up a little bit so he's a little bit taller. And then think about a gesture that would suit him. If he's scared or if he goes into a reaction, like what kind of character is he? Is he someone that's just going to do this big Tex Avery antic, or is he going to do something that's more suits his personality? So, and then we have a silhouette. So if the ladybug starts to flutter or something like that, and that startles him, you can go from this pose to this pose. So you're doing an opposite reaction here. Again, you can, if you notice, when I'm drawing the character, I'm doing something very simple with the hands. I'm actually doing a basic mitten or a ball for a fist. I'm not getting caught up in each little finger in the bend and get caught up in that minutia. In long shots, especially when you're looking at the full body, it's not something that's going to read. So try to think about the arm with an extension, or the hand as an extension of the arm rather than trying to get into all the detail. Normally if I do something where I'm going to split up the fingers, I'll still group the fingers. As in a long shot, it still reads. And then if you even use that technique when you're doing close-ups, by grouping your fingers, you're still getting something that's appealing, it's simple, it's easier to in between, you can control those volumes a little bit more than if you draw a hand with all these individual fingers and you're complicating your drawing and stuff. So simplify it, less is more, and just have fun in what you're doing. Thank you very much.